All right, awesome.
Okay.
Let's get started.
Okay, great. Okay, again, thanks everybody for joining. And I just want to point out to the people, I've already mentioned this to the people who are here early, but the people who continue to join, feel free to use the chat buttons and the Q&A buttons at the bottom of the webinar interface. We'll try to answer questions in real time as they come in, and any questions that aren't answered in real time, we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. We'll make sure we save a little bit of time for that. So again, welcome Patrick Palm, welcome Daniel Tabar. I'm John Leslie, and I'm going to share my screen. This is the remote startup Favro Agile Leadership webinar. As Patrick mentioned, we've been doing quite a few of these. This is actually only our second remote startup webinar, and this is the first one that is being presented entirely out of Favro, as you can see here.
Oh, nice.
So we've been doing quite a few of these out of Favro from a game startup, a remote game studio standpoint, but this is the first one focused on startups, fully run out of Favro. So I want to point out that everything you're seeing today, everything we're going to be talking about, discussing, is going to be done out of this, what's called a Favro collection. And I'm going to share the link with everybody who's registered, everybody who's attending, everybody who's in the webinar today. There's going to be useful article links. There's going to be useful examples directly in Favro that you can get to help you with your startup, to help you run your remote startup even. So just to kick things off, a little overview of the agenda. This is a Favro timeline view of a board, Favro board. We're going to start off just some introductions from the speakers, myself, Daniel, and Patrick. Patrick is going to walk us through the origin story, so to say, of Favro. What was the idea, the genesis of Favro? Where did it come from? Where did the idea come from? And how has it progressed through the years that Favro has been an actual product? Then Patrick's going to conduct a kind of one-on-one interview with Daniel Tabar, get his take on his startup, and also how to run a remote startup now that basically everybody's running remote. And then I'm going to take over, jump in, and kind of get to the meat of the webinar and talk about the benefits of a remote startup, the challenges, and some of the solutions. Then we're going to move on to my company, Broadcove Insights, and Patrick's company, Favro. We've partnered together to put together this Favro Quick Start specifically for startups to help you get up and running, especially remotely, as quickly as possible. And then we're going to open it up again to Q&A. So that being said, here we have Patrick Palm. I'm going to let him take over and start the conversation about the origin of Favro.
All right, awesome. Well, the origin story really starts with another company. My two fellow co-founders and I, we built a company that was also about agile, but it was agile software development exclusively and in very large industrial projects. We sold that company in 2017 to an American company to focus on this idea about bringing this agile way of working to any kind of team, not just software developers, but marketing, operations, legal, HR, leaders, executives, founders, investors, basically everyone. And the reason this is so important is because what really matters today is the agility of the whole organization. If you want to survive and thrive in the market today, it's really about how agile are you, as a whole organization, not just a specific team, within that organization. So we really set out to create something that would work and be easy to use for each of these teams, but then would connect all these dots together so you would be able to create alignment, towards the goals that you have. Because the market, the way it looks today, you have to kind of choose between, some tools that are, easy to use, like, let's say Monday.com. You have, Asana, ClickUp, Notion, these kind of tools that are, really easy to use. It's good tools. But they really aren't helping you so much, when you try to connect all the thing on the level of, the whole organization. And then you have all these enterprise tools that have all the features, in the world. So you can check everything, off that list to solve all your enterprise needs. But the problem is that these tools are typically built upon, acquisition on acquisition, and they kind of glue together, and doesn't give a truly great experience. So what we thought was that if we from the beginning design for something that works for not only each team, but also to work with that kind of alignment towards a common goal, that would be something which is truly needed, in this day and age. And we didn't foresee COVID. I mean, Favro, the way we thought it from the beginning, was designed to be, the most powerful tool for the most ambitious organizations that truly wanted to win in their markets. So you could say that the companies that were, buying Favro, it was very opportunity driven, the opportunity to be better than everyone else. But now with COVID, things have changed a bit because everyone were forced to work remote. And we're seeing today that many companies are announcing that they're not going back to the old normal. It's going to be new normal with more of a hybrid, where the central place of work is really not the physical office, it's really online. So it means it's going to be more important what kind of tools you're using. Using the best tools online for your online work is going to be more important than having the most fancy office. So it's been going from being opportunity driven to being, I would say, necessity driven. So COVID has accelerated a trend that we saw. Now, another thing that also has happened that has been important for Favro is that we from the beginning designed Favro to have enterprise grade security and data governance capabilities, and the need for that has been accelerated with everything going on with GDPR and some recent court rulings, and we're seeing a bit of a trend globally that countries are starting to care more about data governance and data sovereignty. So Favro is designed from the beginning. We have many enterprise customers that do kind of like the whole full assessment. With all the lawyers and IT people kind of going through this, and we're able to live up to that on the same level as the big players. Still being a relatively small startup from Sweden, but it's also one big advantage that we have, and that is that if you look at our kind of the most competing products, most of them are simply from the US. Because the US is, typically always best when it comes to, B2B tools. And, there's one exception. You also take, for example, Monday.com, which is from Israel. But the issue with this is that you have Cloud Act in the US. Companies within the European Union are not super happy about, these kind of things. And us being a Swedish company, plus having all the capabilities for these kind of things, have now proven to be quite important, because it's not only companies within the European Union that starts to be a bit worried about these kind of things. So there's a couple of things that are coming together here. Some that we expected and planned for. So that's kind of nice. In retrospect, you can say yes. We saw the future and we designed for it. And there's been a couple of things that have been happening also that we didn't foresee. And that has also been important to the kind of change which is going on in the market today. So this is really the background to Favro or Favro. We use both ways of pronouncing it. One of the coolest things about running this company is the clients, because our customers are basically really progressive venture-backed startups, many unicorn companies, and big enterprises doing agile transformations, basically trying to disrupt themselves. So the people that we get the chance to speak to on an everyday basis are all doing pretty cool things. And some of them, we invite to this webinar series. As John mentioned, everything from game developers to startups, to enterprises. We try to pick from all the various groups that are big users of Favro. And today we got Daniel here, which has been a client for a while. Building a truly visionary company. Atomontage. Do I pronounce it right now? Yeah.
Atomontage.
Yeah. 90% right.
Yeah. That's all good.
Language was never my thing at school. Fortunately, I was better at math and other things. So, I mean, I always love having kind of lunch or just simpler conversation with a fellow entrepreneur, and you've been at it for a while. So, I mean, I guess the question I would really like to ask is that what were the defining moments you doing your entrepreneurial journey, because you've done several things, and I mean what was the kind of a defining moment that led you to truly become an entrepreneur in the first place, and also of course now with Atomontage, how what was the defining moment that created that story?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. I actually have to dig in my memory quite a bit for that, but I have, before Atomontage, I had kind of 20 years of game development in the bag, and it was at larger companies in the beginning, but mostly it was my own indie studio. So that was an entrepreneurial journey also. And I grew up in Sweden and moved to the US about 20 years ago. So I was in my teens, like 16 years old and so on. And it was before college. I went to college in the US, ended up dropping out of college. And one of those moments that you're asking about is, I was really had in my mind that I wanted to be a programmer. I loved computer science. I loved computer games. And I was on that track to be an employee, working in a cubicle somewhere, working on churning out code and all that. It was like my whole mindset was on that rail, like that career path, going through, getting the bachelor's degree in computer science and going to work for some company. And that got derailed. I read some books. There was some media really that kind of made that shift happen. One of my favorite movies of all time is Office Space. If you guys recall that cult classic by Mike Judge, I believe, about this guy or his friends working at a stereotypical, almost comically crappy corporate gig, in the US, and it's a great movie.
The famous baseball bat scene.
Exactly. Yeah. They take a bat to their printer because the printer is, pissed them off one time too many. That was one, like those things that shifted my mind. Like, I really don't want to be in that situation, even though it is a comedy and so on. So that was one thing. Another funny thing that comes to mind is that I actually started making a game inspired by all the other games I've been playing as a teenager and kid growing up. I've started making a game for myself, and the goal of it was actually to land a job in the games industry with it, so to use it as some kind of demo. And that actually worked out. I did end up dropping out of college with a friend to start a what they call a cyber cafe. Back then, that was a thing, where there was a bunch of computers in a retail space, and you could come in and surf the internet. But we made it into a LAN party place, so that was the concept. This did not work out. After a year of running that business, I realized I never want to run a retail business again. But we did drop out of college for that, and then I never went back because I had this game project that I could actually apply for some game companies, and I ended up moving to Arizona. I was in California at the time, and then moved to Arizona. I got hired at Rainbow Studios with, I think, mostly this game project. I could show that I had built something in C++ and it had physics and so on. So that part of the plan worked out. What didn't work out is that I realized I'm now in a cubicle again, that And in the game company, cubicles are not as bad as some kind of, I don't know, accounting software firm, perhaps. But I also realized that I didn't really fit as a cog in a much larger machine, and the project that I would sink years of my life into might get canceled by forces that are not out of my control and so on. And that really kind of, again, pushed me in this direction of an entrepreneurial thing. So I ended up quitting that company just to focus on this game that I had started building in my teens, even before I moved to the US. And that really started this entrepreneurial journey that lasted a long time. And I ran this studio that initially released that game as early access before early access was a concept. I got that idea from another game that really did it before me, but then Marcus Pashon, the Minecraft guy, got the idea about early access from my game, Cortex Command. So this was very early days of the indie scene and so on, and I was part of that journey. As an entrepreneur, I think any indie can be considered an entrepreneur. They're starting a small company that builds very creative, innovative things. And so that was the beginning. Those were kind of like some of the moments that shifted me into doing the entrepreneurial thing, which, yeah, some people, I think you've even said this, Patrick, is like the hard way. It's the hard path in life.
Yeah. Why choose the easy one when you can do the hard one?
Exactly.
But and then, going back to Atomontage, how what was the thing that made that happen?
It ties into the story that I just started, because that first game I made, Cortex Command, as it's called, you can find it on Steam. It's open source and everything, but that had certain. It was a 2D side-scrolling game, and it was inspired by a game called Liero. It's obscure, but a kind of cult Finnish game. Actually, some Finnish developer made it, and it looks like Worms. Liero does, but it's in real time, and it's like you can have all this physics happening, and you can dig into the ground and so on. And I built on that with Cortex Command, where you can really have many different materials in the terrain, so to speak. And it's that perspective. It's like a cross section of the world, and you can build bunkers that have harder surroundings and so on. And all of this, every pixel of the terrain had its own material properties, and you can blast it off, or you could add to it. If your character died, he would actually become part of the terrain. So after a while, you would have these, like, you could do an archaeological survey of what has happened in a scene just based on this interesting way of modeling the world. And that led me to actually wanting to make a 3D version of that game. So that was all 2D, but realizing what that would take is a really sophisticated technology to make those little pixels in my game turn into cubes, which are called voxels, really. Pixels are a 2D concept, and voxel is a 3D equivalent of that. And so I looked at all the different voxel technologies out there, and there's been a lot of projects. A lot of people have attempted to make games and actually succeeded. In the 90s, there were a couple of games, Comanche and Delta Force, and some of these things were published back then that used voxel technology. But then a certain thing happened in the world where hardware acceleration happened for all these polygonal games, and that has been the standard. But anyway, back to the kind of the stories that I was looking for voxel technologies that I could use, and for this new game I wanted to make, the Cortex Command in 3D. And I ended up finding my co-founder that way today. Back then he had already been working on his technology or his project. It's a research project that was completely donation based. He just published videos for years and years already at that point. And this is almost exactly 10 years ago from now. So we started talking then, and I started supporting him in any way I could. I sent him donations. I believe my game company was one of the biggest donors to his project. And I started showing and talking to people at all the game conferences I ended up going to anyway about this tech, just to kind of see if I could make it more of reality where I could actually end up using it one day. I don't want to just help Brano along. And then eventually I started showing it to someone who Patrick, as well. It's Tommy Palm. It's another entrepreneur here in Sweden, in the game space. And he told me pretty much straight up that this is amazing technology, but this one guy in Slovakia, where my co-founder is, Brano, he's not going to be able to build a whole company on his own with this. Like, this is something he needs help with. And Brano knew that too. He had that as part of his plan. But Tommy told me, find some, Brano needs someone to help him build the actual business. And I immediately started to think, like, who can I find? Like, who do I know who could do this? And Tommy then, kind of pointed out, like, you already have the relationship with Brano, you have the trust and so on. Why not you? And then the kind of coin dropped, and that was in 2017, and we came up with this. We started the company together at the end of 2017, very end, and we've been on this journey together now. And now we have a series of teams. Actually, we're still not very large. We're 10, 11 people or something like this, and we're putting out the first product just now. So in a month from now, we're going to actually have the first product announcement of what we've been building. So it's an exciting time, but yeah, that's the kind of story of how we're here today.
So you mentioned, voxels and kind of getting a little bit into, what it is that you do, but, for the ones that aren't, familiar with what this means, how would you, how would you describe, what voxels, mean in layman terms, and also more specifically, what the company, is trying to achieve here, and if you can give some examples of applications, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So our slogan publicly right now, still we're changing it soon, but it's the inevitable volumetric future. So when we say volumetric, it really is a way to describe, what we're trying to do with computers is to model the world, right? Like the real world. And there's different approaches to do that, and different ways to represent the data and represent geometry and so on. And that's true for many different media types, not just 3D, for example. You see that with audio as well. Audio initially was like MIDI files, and all you're storing is notes, essentially, tones or whatever, and that's what's being played back. And that's kind of a vector-based format, if you think about it. It's versus when I say vector, I kind of juxtapose it against sampling. So sampling happened with audio also, where you're actually recording little samples of what is being heard right now, and then you can play that back later. And that's a different way of representing the world than this like mathematical vector based way. And vectors have their benefits. They're initially smaller to store and more efficient in some ways, but they're not really always the most accurate way to, if you want to record a symphony orchestra, it's actually better to just have a microphone and record it and sample it instead of trying to come up with all the different notes that are playing at the same time and so on. It ends up being messy and actually bigger to store and to process eventually. So without getting too much into like the technical nitty gritty, this is a pattern that has happened in many different media types before. So in audio, I just mentioned, but also with pictures, we have vector graphics still, but it was the earliest way to do computer graphics, was all these vector things. It's all you need to define are some points, and you have lines between them, and that's what you're drawing. And that eventually also went through this kind of evolution where we're sampling images now. Everything is a pixel-based image, and pixels are just little samples. It's colors that are arrayed in a big grid with a certain known distance between all those pixels, and that's a 2D media type, of course. And then video is adding another dimension. It's time, right? So that also in the initial forms of video was flash and all these things that are vector driven, and you're storing objects and things in mathematical kind of formulas or coordinates. But eventually we had breakthroughs in compression and then sampling technology to make videos viable in terms of size and also transmitting them and processing them. And now we have YouTube, and everything can be encoded in a 4K video, and you don't need to mess with these vectors anymore, because they are a little bit complex to actually store and to have different formats of and so on. And the same thing, and this is what we call it, inevitable revolution that's going to happen with 3D, is that 3D content is in our minds about to go through the same revolution. It just hasn't yet, and this same pattern that all these other media types. And so that's really the kind of the the core of what we're doing is this compression breakthrough that, and really is Brano's work, my co-founder's work, who worked on this for almost 20 years now. Actually, it is about 20 years now. His R&D project started as kind of in the demo scene. Some people might know about that. He made some early demos that won some competitions back in the day. These 256 byte demos that actually had graphics on the screen with the whole program being 256 byte large. It's crazy stuff. And he won some competitions there. And that was the initial inception in his mind that this is the future, is to sample things in 3D instead of trying to describe only their surfaces with triangles and vectors. And that's, that's kind of a technical discussion. Yeah. What was the second part of the question there?
So if I understand you, you're right here. You made an example that if we look at sound. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the MIDI files.
Yeah.
And they're becoming MP3s, and then with the video, Flash, becoming really everything now can be a YouTube clip.
Yeah.
And what you're saying here is that we're about to have the same thing happening to 3D.
Yes, exactly. Because if you think about, go ahead. Sorry.
It's a good slogan. Why do you want to change the slogan? It's an amazing slogan.
The inevitable volumetric.
Explain what you're doing.
Okay, so I can. It's not revealed yet, the new slogan, but it is more descriptive of our product. So you'll see it in a month. But it's more descriptive of our product. The current inevitable volumetric future is a good description of our vision and of our concept, so to speak, but it's not so much a good description of the value proposition of our product. Also, we've had some interesting feedback that inevitable is not actually a very exciting term if you think about it, because it's going to happen anyway. So why should anyone get excited about it, to push it? So there's some thinking behind it, but yeah, the new slogan is a much more descriptive of what we actually do, and that's been a challenge for us. We have these breakthrough prototypes and so on that you can see on our website that prove that we can do certain things with very high resolution voxels, and this kind of geometry type representation that nobody else can. And I know this because I've been looking at all the different things out there for over 10 years now, in this quest to find something for my game. And I'm not on that quest anymore because Tommy got me off of that quest. That was a bigger impact in the world than making yet another game, is to build some technology, so.
But that's awesome. And, if you would are there any good examples of this, more from a conceptual point of view, having an application already today? Because I mean, what you're building, it's kind of like a platform technology enable, people to be able to do these things. But are there applications already today to kind of give us a little bit of a hint of what it is that your platform is enabling?
Yeah. So I think even that is not revealed yet, that we're building a platform, but it's fine to tease that. But yeah, in terms of in a concrete example is, like I mentioned before, that we're trying to model the real world in our computers, and the computers are just ones and zeros at the very bottom, right? So it's all it's numbers that not only store data but also do things, right? And it's all math, and so we want to represent the world with this math somehow, and you could do it by defining surfaces and defining and tessellating surfaces, and that's how most 3D graphics is done these days, with these triangles that make up polygons that make up surfaces, and then we put textures on them and all this stuff. But then you're really only talking about the surface of a thing, for example. So if you want to know what's on the inside of something, which you do in a lot of cases, if you want to something as simple as sculpting, by adding or removing matter, you need to have a model of what's on the inside. Or if you want to understand, if in a game, if you want to destroy something, if you want to dig into the ground, for example, like you do in Minecraft, but at higher resolution, you need to know, or even in Minecraft, that makes sense too. I mean, at the low resolution, that conceptually it's the same thing. You need to know what's in there. And if you don't have data, what's inside objects, you either have to do some hacks or some tricks to kind of generate that data, or have some kind of thing that invents stuff on the inside when that's not really there yet. And it becomes very complex actually to do with vector graphics. But a really concrete thing is, for example, we have some data sets that are available. They're available to the public from research done in the US, where they've actually, it's a little bit gory, but this is kind of an academic thing that has been used in a lot of ways. They had people who were on death row who donated their bodies to science, and they froze down their whole bodies after they died and sliced off 1 millimeter at a time and took a picture of the cross section and ended up with this 3D volumetric data set of the entire human body with all the organs and everything on the inside. And if you want to actually render that or do something with that as it has become a digitized volumetric thing, you can't really do that well with something that only describes surfaces, right? Because there's much more than just the surface in there. So if you want to, for example, do a virtual anatomy educational tool where really the real cadaver is kind of represented in depth, trying to do that with polygons is going to be very either limited or lose a lot of that data that's there. You can imagine, yeah.
So the scientific community and medical community could massively benefit from this. Yes. I can see from that example. But so to go to like a Swedish example, I mean, there's been an absolutely crazy success of this new game Teardown, which is a lot of fun. It's kind of fun demolishing stuff, right? And that is a bit of a one-man show game, but it's been doing crazy well on Steam.
Yeah.
I mean, can you comment on that? Because that's also voxels, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So Dennis Gustafsson, the one-man guy, which he does have other folks on the team that are helping him with building content and so on, but he really built that whole engine and the game design himself. He's clearly a genius. He didn't use any other engine out there. He built it himself. So that alone is huge respect. That he built it so innovatively to use voxels to run the physics and also to run the ray tracing, which is very nice in that game for all the lighting and so on. That's all dynamic. So yeah, if you do wreck a house, which the game is like a heist-based game design, so you actually need to damage houses or vehicles in ways to actually succeed in your mission. But if you put a hole in the roof of a house, you actually see the sun come through and so on. And you can do all that because of this technology he's built. I think it's a success already, and it has like 10,000 overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. It was released in October, so in a couple of months, this is clearly awesome. A hit. Yeah, it's amazing. And rightfully so, because I think Minecraft also, it's building on this thing that Minecraft kind of started scratching the surface of, this fact that we like to call it deep interactivity. We just made up this term, but it describes a little bit that a lot of the games out there, when they only describe surfaces, you get these very pretty scenes and so on, but you can't really do a lot with them. You have this static geometry that is even Grand Theft Auto and so on. The whole city is amazing and it's large and it looks amazing, but it is very static. Like you can't drive that car into the building and rob the bank because there's nothing inside that hole most of the time. And Minecraft started scratching the surface where at very low resolution you can do anything you want, kind of like Lego building blocks, and you can dig into the ground and find things inside of there and dig up diamonds and whatever. Teardown is just taking it to the next level in the terms of the resolution. The cubes are much smaller than in Minecraft's 1 meter cubes. And it's unlocking this thing in interactivity, which again, we call deep interactivity, which you can deeply change the world. The world is simulated in a much more realistic way that approximates reality much more closely. Even if it's large kind of chunky cubes, the fact that you can destroy them, you can add to them, you can build things with them, you can have physical simulations happen. Like in Teardown, you can actually, and in Minecraft too, actually, you can set fire to things. Mm-hmm. And if they're made out of wood, and if they have other cubes next to them that are also made out of wood, that fire can spread, Mm-hmm. So this is something that really, I think, tickles people's minds, in a way, because this resembles the real world. It's doing things in a plausible simulation that you would expect, and most games out there can't do this because of this limited representation of only surfaces that are kind of static most of the time.
But if I can jump in there, if I
Yeah.
understand you right, because I think, many people have, they might have an experience or at least, a feel for what Minecraft is about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if people imagine that, but instead of things kind of looking blocky, things look like, real.
Yes.
Yes. That's kind of the experience we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And before, when I kind of dropped, the term, platform, you said, hey, that's a nice tease,
Yeah.
And I can't wait, to hear, more exactly, what it is that you're going to release here. But, what I meant by that was that when, if you look at something like Teardown, and then you go to like your website and kind of read about what it is that you potentially could provide, it feels like if I want help, if I want to buy something that can help me create that kind of experiences, you are the guys I should talk to. I mean, I think that's pretty clear already today from your website, even though it's not
that's true.
yet, some of the things. So it seems like, I understand what you're saying with the problem with inevitable future, but I actually really like it because I want to be early on a wave which is coming. It's like if you surf, you don't want to be behind the wave, you want to be in front of the wave.
Yeah.
And someone who could then help to make that a reality. It seems like you're the company to partner with. This kind of very like from a distance kind of description of the whole thing. Do you feel, am I getting it somewhat right, or am I getting it a little bit wrong here?
I think you're spot on. No, it's we again, I don't want to reel too much, but really my passion in life, and you can see that in my previous games also. That first one I mentioned, Cortex Command, was I think popular mostly because, and it had these very long legs. There's, I believe, still a community of people modding that game because it allowed people to modify the game very deeply. And I built the tools and enable. I released all the tools that I used myself to build the game, and I didn't really have a plan for this, but I built also that engine to be very data driven and so on. So everything could be modified by these little files that you could edit and so on, and that really took off and became like a thing where user generated content in general, I think, is such a powerful thing that is going to become even more big in the future. We've only seen the beginning of that. There's been Doom and mods and so on for a long time. And UGC, I mean, you see Roblox now becoming an IPO. It's one of the big kind of UGC IPOs. And again, I look at Roblox and I see this is so early still. This is just scratching the surface of what can be done. And what we're really kind of, what all this is amounting to, even my other games that I've built, it's just building on this. Like, how can we make the friction between creator and consumer as little as possible, but also how can we blur the line between creator and consumer? So the consumer becomes a creator and vice versa. And everyone becomes the threshold for becoming a creator of any kind of content. And in our case, it's 3D content, but is so much lower because in the current day and age with the way we're doing 3D graphics, it's very complex. Like defining these surfaces and then mapping 2D images onto them as textures. That ends up being a very complex setup that you need to worry about polygon count limits. You need to worry about the UV mapping not getting messed up when you're editing either the texture or the model. And this really needs like a Renaissance person to handle. You need to be technically savvy enough to run these tools that are very complex. The most complex computer programs we have are like 3D Studio Max, Maya, and so on. And you also need to have the artistic talent to make something that looks great, for example. So these people are rare, and it's a shame that only those folks can actually build something in meaningful and like 3D content. And I think lowering that barrier by having a much easier representation of the geometry, where it's more like you're just working with clay, or kids can build whatever they want in Minecraft because it's just these blocks. It's very conceptually simple. It's not simple to implement, unfortunately. In our case, it's fortunate because we have a solution that works, but after decades of R&D on this, and many other people, very smart people, have spent 5 years on this, and it still wasn't enough to build something that had very low, high resolution, very small blocks in the end. Because really, if you think about it, your screen, you might be sitting in front of a 4K monitor now. There's millions and millions of pixels there. And if you just make the screen a little higher resolution, it's going to be millions more pixels. But if you add another dimension and you want to increase the resolution, now you have an explosion of data. It's much worse, right? So you really need to have these breakthroughs to make it viable. And that's what we feel we have. And we are excited now because we can potentially and hopefully, and we're confident that we have a way to really lower these barriers of entry to making stuff, but also sharing them and enjoying 3D content in a whole new way, which again, Minecraft and Teardown has scratched the surface of. It's a really tip of the iceberg, I feel, to make this exciting future.
I mean, I think that's very clear, and I want to kind of switch a little bit, to John here, because we need to talk a bit about best practices around working in a remote way, and in your case, Daniel, we have this situation that in the middle of building this startup with a very exciting potential, suddenly COVID hits, But I know, I mean, you're Swedish, but I know you have a bit of an American background as well. You have, we already talked about at least 2 countries. You have raised, money from angels, but you also got raised venture capital from Makers Fund, which is have an absolutely amazing reputation. So, obviously, not only, tech people like, John and I are very excited about this vision. A lot of VCs are also tech people, but you also managed to get the venture capital to think this is really cool. So you've been able to to hire people at a fast pace. So your team has been going from used to 2 of you to now you got more people. So my question is really how did you handle the whole COVID situation now when you can't really be together, and how do you plan to handle organization basically coming out of COVID, because now we're starting to see kind of the light in the tunnel here with vaccines coming?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me personally, I it really wasn't even a bump in the road. For me, it's lucky, but I almost feel bad that it's been such little impact on my life, because I've always worked remote in the 20 years of making games before this. It was a completely remote team. We were 24 people in, I think, 10 or 12 countries on like 4 continents. So we never had an office and so on. So like using these remote tools and ways of working has been super natural for me. Natural. For Atomontage, we've been a hybrid. So we have a core team that sits with Bronislav, my co-founder, in Slovakia in an actual office. I mean, clearly not this year, but prior to it. And then we have some remote teams, and I'm remote. I'm in Stockholm these days. And so we already had a lot of these processes up and running, and it wasn't really that much of a problem. For me, nothing really changed. For the guys who were in the office, they're now working from home. We use tools for remote work. Favro is actually one of them. It's almost, it feels bad. I think this is a thing that most of the games industry, my friends from the games industry feel also, that it's almost, what's the word? There's a good Swedish word for this, and I'm oförskämt. It's like almost undeserved, like how good things are for the games. And not only is business even better, but it's like our lives are really not that impacted by this horrible thing that is killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, before it's over. So it's it's this weird kind of feeling. But that's the story of how it has impacted our company. Not much. If anything, it's probably going to be easier for us to convince people that our products are going to be even that much more valuable now and in the future, because it makes sharing 3D content much easier. That's really kind of another key thing that is a bit of a tease, I guess, for our product. But In terms of the second part of the question is like, how are we going to go back? Again, it's going to be not much different. We're going to have the guys who are in Bratislava. They're going to be able to gather in the office again and have the benefits that are there for actually being together. We deliberately wanted our core tech team to be physically together because there's a lot of knowledge exchange, especially in the beginning now from my co-founder Bronislav's brain, where this enormous store of experience and knowledge about voxel technologies had to be transferred into the brains of all our core tech guys. That was better done in person, as you can imagine. So yeah, they're going to go back to the office, but all our processes, all our meetings and all this stuff is all Zoom based anyway. And so it's really not that much of a change.
You mentioned that you used, Favro already, before, COVID hit. So,
yeah,
great. I mean, more specifically, do you have some examples of problems that you have solved with using Favro?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in general, I mean, again, like I said, I've done this like remote production thing for a long time before this, and I used Trello in our previous company, which served us pretty well. But I consistently came into this like overwhelmed feeling with Trello, where we just had boards with endless cards, and it actually started running slow because of that also. And now it's compounding the problem because I hope people realize how much a little bit of friction actually affects your outcome in the end. This is true for physics in general. Like a artillery shell that's fired and it has no air friction, it'll go forever, right? Like it'll fly into space, right? But or in orbit. But if you just add a little bit of air friction, it'll dramatically shorten that length that it goes, right? And if you fire it through water, it'll just immediately stop. So friction is huge, and even if you think that doing small actions like anything simple like moving some cards around or editing them, and it takes just a fraction of a second longer, and you do that hundreds of times a day, it really wears down on your energy in general and just your time in real sense, but also just your mental kind of, man, this feels like more work than if something just took a little bit shorter for these basic actions. And when something like Trello starts slowing down because there's hundreds of cards on the board, now not only do you have hundreds of cards that make you feel overwhelmed, but you also feel like you're dealing with some kind of syrup. Like it's not good. And Favro is built from the ground up clearly to be very fast and responsive. And it's one of the things that, not only the way that we can organize the views better in a way that makes it not feel so overwhelming. Each person can filter out everything so they only see their stuff. I know there's some tools for that in Trello, but they're just not as refined. And in Favro, we feel like that is much more powerfully done. But also the actions are more snappy, like opening a card, editing some stuff, and just like closing it is quite nice and fast, and it has some nice keyboard shortcuts, which I think is very powerful. I think the keyboard is an underrated input device. And as soon as you start reaching for your mouse, now you're adding those milliseconds to every action. It's not a good thing. Any programmer, I think, can relate to that.
Yeah. Cool. And I remember we had a conversation before around Jira, where I think I brought up the case that many of kind of our startup customers, they make more of a choice between what tool to use versus with more of the customers we have that's been around for a while, the bigger organizations. There it's very often that they actually use the Favro integration with Jira, so it will go hand in hand. And then for the rest of the organization outside of engineering, they will use Favro, and some of the things have to do with engineering, they use Jira. But how's your situation been with these kind of things?
Well, we did look at, we actually in the early days of Atomontage, 3 years ago, we did start with Trello actually and tracked our tasks more of like the forming the company and so on. When we started the production with actual programmers as our teams formed, we started, we did a survey basically of all the tools out there, and there's a lot, Jira, you mentioned Monday. There's plenty of others as well that I'm forgetting now, but it felt like a lot of these were kind of very legacy so to speak. Like they had a lot of history, and they were older, and there were like layers of things on top of layers of things, and both in the thinking and the process and so on. And what to us, like Favro stood out a little bit because it seemed like a newer thinking of, this is a pattern in general. You have tools that get better over time. The newer tools are usually better because whoever is making that new tool is motivated enough to go through the pain of making a new tool. And they're motivated because the things that are existing at the time have some flaws or downsides or something that they want to improve on. And so usually the better tool, if they're competently built, they're going to be better because there's new principles and there's better execution perhaps and so on. And so Favro is, I think that was one of the main things that made it win out for us. It seemed like it was well thought out based on the current landscape of features and so on. And it didn't have things that it didn't need, but it had all the things it needed for what we needed. And that was pretty much what made us zero in on it. Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's really cool, especially coming from, you who developed, many tools. We're going to switch back to you, John, now. Daniel, super thanks for taking the time to have this conversation with us. Feel free to stay to the end. Mm-hmm. There might be some questions coming up. But John, I would like to hand back to you.
Thanks, Patrick. And thanks, Daniel. That was fascinating. Especially, me coming from game development background myself. I was a big fan of Outcast, which I believe is a voxel-based game from the late
That's true. That was a good one, yeah.
And speaking of the inevitable volumetric future, I think right now we are experiencing the inevitable remote future. It's been a long time coming, and as Patrick said, instead of opportunity, it's now necessity. And I'm going to share my screen. And since we're presenting the rest of this in Favro, you're going to see what Daniel called out, which is that Favro is incredibly fast. It's incredibly responsive. The amount of data, the amount of rendering cards, images on those cards, data on those cards that can happen in a single screen, browser-based collection, so to say, is just unbelievable, really. Especially if you've used other tools, especially those other tools, legacy-based tools that have tried to add on more of this kind of cards on a board type user interface and user experience. So on each one of these boards, this speaker board right here, for example, if you click on any one of these cards, and see how fast that opened up, you're going to have links to Patrick, links to Daniel, his kind of bio, his LinkedIn page, his company. Same for me. So any one of these cards in this collection that I'm going to share out to you is going to be valuable information, valuable links. So onto the remote startup. And when the pandemic first hit, I've been working remote for years and years as a partner with Favro, for example. Most of my business was done remote even prior to the pandemic. So this has just been, I've always appreciated this way of working. I've always known that it was a better way than going to, as you said, that office space, which is the worst case scenario type environment. And that probably did inspire a lot of people to move into an entrepreneurial type of career, which good on Office Space. But when the pandemic hit, then the whole world realized that maybe remote or some hybrid is a better way. And one of the inspirations to Patrick and I, when we first started talking about doing this remote webinar Agile Leadership Series, was this Martin Mikos. He wrote an open letter essentially to the world talking about his company HackerOne, how they've always been essentially remote. Then they moved to 100% remote first when the pandemic hit. And this quote from that letter was very inspirational to me in particular. The Industrial Revolution brought us the idea that work is a place different from home and that work is done in physical proximity of many other people. It is the idea of the joint workplace that is the anomaly. Working from home is natural. And that absolutely resonated with me. I absolutely agree that that's true. I truly believe that this whole, well, there are certain situations that are better served by face-to-face communication. You know, when you're trying to transfer knowledge, as Daniel gave in the example of somebody who holds all the knowledge, they're trying to, you know, pass that knowledge on to other people. You're probably much better served by having that face-to-face interaction in order to facilitate that. But for the vast majority of work, knowledge work, working in such close proximity with other people is actually a huge distraction. It's very difficult to get real work done in that physical proximity, knowledge work done in that physical proximity to so many people, especially in an open plan workspace, which a lot of these offices had turned into prior to the pandemic. So that being said, another inspirational quote for us is this quote from Jason Fried and David Hansen, the two founders of 37 Signals. They're also the builders of competitor to Favro, actually, Basecamp. But they wrote this book, Remote. They were kind of had the foresight back in 2013 called Remote. And a quote from there: offices has become interruption factories. The ability to be alone with your thoughts is in fact one of the key advantages of working remotely. Absolutely true. You know, just from my own experiences working in open plan offices, it's very difficult to get things done. There's constantly people coming up and interrupting you, whether it's just to socialize or it's actually work related. You have very few chunks, so to say, of uninterrupted time to get that real work done. And remote work done right, without an overabundance of Zoom meetings, is absolutely a more productive way to run your teams, to actually run your startups, run your enterprises even. So speaking of the benefits, and when we first started doing this webinar series, we knew these to be true, and now the world is knowing these to be true, right? I mean, you have companies like Facebook, you have companies like Twitter, you have, you know, even Microsoft. Who would have thought that Microsoft, with their huge, massive campus in Redmond and their large investment in physical space, same things with Salesforce. Who would ever thought that they would say that they're essentially going to move to a remote first way of working? But that's come to be. That's the reality of the world we're now living in. And I think that's one of the positives that's coming out of this whole ordeal that we're currently going through. But lower overhead. So this is obvious and should have been obvious even before the pandemic, right? So no or reduced office space. Just that cost savings alone is huge. Now, travel, they're saying post-pandemic, people have realized that business travel, way too much business travel. And even post-pandemic, that business travel will probably only go up to 35% of what it was pre-pandemic. Just not so much of a need to travel as we currently thought there was. I personally kind of miss the travel, but I could probably deal with 35% of what I had prior to the pandemic. All the other things that go along with not having that physical office space, the utilities, the insurance, the furniture, the maintenance, the facilities, the staff, security, on and on, right? So, and the idea, as Patrick said, is that instead of having those physical spaces, you now have these digital spaces where the work is actually happening. So instead of collaborating in real time synchronously or even asynchronously like you can do in these remote platforms like Favro, you can actually run, and I have an article here that I wrote, link to it here on this card, you can actually run your entire company with a single app, essentially using Favro. And that app becomes the office, becomes your digital office, so to say, where the work actually happens. Another benefit of, and companies, as you said, Daniel, companies that were working remotely and distributed prior to the pandemic already realized this, right? That you're able to not only find and acquire the best talent, but retain the best talent, regardless of geographic location. When you're remote and distributed, it doesn't matter where that talent is. You don't have to have people relocate to very expensive cities like San Francisco and New York or even Stockholm. They can live and continue to live anywhere in the world and be active contributors to whatever that value is that you're trying to create as a startup, as an organization. Just a quick example here of being some of the rich content you can create on these Favro cards. You can create tables. You can collaborate in real time directly on these cards. You can have conversations specific to where the work is happening directly on these cards. Removes the need for a lot of other tools, like maybe even Google Docs or some of the other G Suite apps or some of the other chat apps, because you can do it all actually where the work is happening and flowing in Favro. So diversity, this is an add-on benefit to acquiring the best talent, right? So whatever product it is that you're creating now in the world is going to be not just regional. It's not going to just be for the US or for Sweden. It's for the world, right? So people have found that the more diversity that you have on your teams, cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, geographic diversity that you have on your teams, you're better served for these global products that you're creating. And so that, with that in mind, I have this example here, kind of showing that Favro isn't just for running product development teams, software development teams. It's to really run your entire business. You know, me being an agile coach, we don't talk about just team agility anymore. We talk about overall business agility, where it's not just the product development teams, it's not just the IT teams, it's the entire organization, including HR, better known as people operations, because we don't want to, agile people don't call people resources. But this is an example of a recruitment Kanban. So recruiting that best talent, wherever they might happen to be in the world, recruiting that diversity. So selected resumes, moving on into who makes it to the interview, onto background checks, who we're going to make the offer to, all the way through to who actually gets hired. So you can see here kind of a nice example of how Favro can be used for any type of flow, so to say. We call it a Kanban board, but basically moving through the various stages, in this case, of finding and hiring, recruiting that best talent, no matter regardless of where they live in the world. And just, I've been saying this a long time in my coaching, through my coaching, that if you want to increase innovation, creativity, productivity, and retention, you got to have happy people, and happy people make happy teams. And that just has been proven time and time again to increase all of these things, your innovation, your creativity, your productivity, and to keep those people, right? So, and a big part of this move to remote, we have something like 80%, it depends on which survey you read, 80% of people don't want to go back to the office. They've seen the light, so to say. They know it can be this way. Maybe they want to go back when they choose to, right? They want to have that option. But for the most part, they want the flexibility. And they found that they're more productive. They can work just as well. They can collaborate just as well as they could, even better. In some cases, there's been productivity gains in some surveys of over 45% just from the move to remote alone. So some of the challenges, right? Everything comes with challenges. Any change comes with challenges. One of the big challenges is your company startup culture, right? So one of the things we realized right away in this mass move to remote for knowledge workers is that, from a culture standpoint, from a strengths and weaknesses standpoint, the move to remote is going to amplify both your strengths and weaknesses of whatever company or organizational culture that you had, right? So if you had a very command and control, kind of task-based, activity-based culture where you have a lot of middle management or hierarchy, that doesn't work in a remote type of setup, right? Because you have to trust your people, you have to trust your teams to be accountable, responsible, autonomous, to get the work done. Command and control in a remote and distributed type of world is a nightmare. It just doesn't work. It didn't really work in the co-located space either. But we kind of thought it did. So you have to move eventually, if you weren't already headed in this direction, you have to move into this more agile, trust and accountability, iterative and incremental, and remote first way of working, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. We have a couple of links here. Patrick and I wrote these articles together, this Favro Remote Work Playbook, which there's a link to. A lot of good, helpful, useful tips, tricks, advice on how to better make that move to remote, or if you've already made that move to remote, to be more successful, more productive, more effective with it. Also to maintain that culture. And Favro's been really good about this. They were remote and distributed to a certain extent before, but now they're fully remote and distributed, of maintaining that, not only the work collaboration, but also how do we socialize? How do we keep that good kind of social connection to our colleagues that we used to have in the physical co-located offices? You can't go to the pub anymore after work, right? But what you can do, and this is what a lot of kids are doing too, right, to maintain their social lives, is the after work, through gaming platforms. We play a lot of Warzone every Friday, myself with the Favro guys, and it keeps that bond, right? It keeps that culture alive within whatever organization it is that you're running. This isn't so much of a problem maybe now, hopefully, as it was when we first made this mass move to remote. But a lot of people asked me, from a coaching perspective, how do I know people are working, right? And that's a huge red flag for an agile coach. Are people working? That just means right away that you don't have a good company culture. If you're worried about tracking activity, tracking tasks, in Agile we say, keep your eyes on the baton, not the runners. Don't worry so much about capacity and are people being fully utilized, because it's not people being fully utilized and being busy that actually provides value to your customers. In a relay race, it's the baton getting around the track 4 times that wins the race. So keep your eyes on the baton, not the runners. The baton being that value that you're delivering to the customers that at the end of the day wins that race for you. So rather than tracking time, activities, are people online, are people using these tools, how long are people in Slack, how long are people, Microsoft just very controversially released this time tracking within Office 365. How long are people in Excel? How long are people in Word? How long are people in Microsoft Teams? Of course, very controversial, could be abused. So don't track time, don't track activities, don't track tasks, rather track the flow of value. That's what really matters. That's what your business is based on. So lots of different ways to do that in Favro. Just a quick example, this marketing team, instead of tracking the individuals and making sure those individuals are busy on this marketing team, instead first visualize, like you can see here in this marketing board, right? They're being driven out of this Favro backlog. They're breaking their marketing campaigns down into all the actual deliverables, all the pieces of value that they need to create to launch this particular marketing product launch campaign. They're feeding those onto this Favro board, and then they're able to visualize that flow of value through each of the various stages, all the way through to done. Nothing to do with tracking time or activities. It's just how quickly are things moving, these things that we need to deliver on, from the left side to the right side. And to help you manage and track that, you can turn on flow-based metrics like time on board, time in column. We can quickly see, are things getting stuck? How long has this particular Instagram ad video card, for example, deliverable piece of value, been stuck in the review stage? So it's been on the board for 22 hours, but it's only been in review for 1 hour. So not bad, right? But why is this particular Facebook ad been stuck for 22 hours, maybe in the requested column? So it helps you visualize, are things moving? Are things flowing from start to finish? To help you with that too, built into every chart every board, there's different ways to visualize the data as a sheet, as a timeline. It's the same cards. You can visualize those same cards in charts, maybe a burn down chart showing you velocity based, meaning basically how quickly are we finishing things, taking that and extrapolating into the future. When are we going to finish everything that we're currently tasked with delivering on? Are we going to finish what we've committed to on time or not? And Favro tracks all of that for you directly on the boards where the work is happening. Things like control charts, cumulative flow charts, other ways to track that value built directly into each and every Favro board. So nothing to do with tracking people. It's all about tracking and visualizing that flow, managing that flow of value. So too many meetings, right? So when we first made this move to remote, everybody's saying, oh my God, I thought we were going to have fewer meetings, but it's meeting overload. I'm constantly in a Zoom meeting. And so that's just a symptom. It's not the real problem. That's a sign that you had not a very good, effective, trust-based, trust accountability-based organizational culture to begin with. That means that people have a lack of direction and clear goals. If they need to be in meetings all the time, constantly trying to figure out what am I supposed to be doing? Am I doing the right thing? Right? It also means that you probably had no way of visualizing progress, visualizing your work in progress, seeing that flow of value through your organization. You couldn't see it. So now you're having meetings and trying to figure out where you have endless status meetings to try to figure out, are people working and how is the work progressing? Which you don't need if you're using a tool like Favro to just visualize that flow of value. And no way to communicate where the work is happening. So you might be having ad hoc Zoom meetings. You might have lots of scheduled Zoom meetings. You might be living your life in Slack because you have no way to communicate directly where the work is happening. Here, I could be collaborating with a colleague on this card. Directly related to whatever I was working on this card. It could be a product feature, it could be a marketing deliverable, whatever the case may be. I can have that communication specific to this work, this piece of value, directly on the card itself. That way you're not endlessly searching through Slack trying to find, okay, I know we made a decision on this particular feature somewhere in Slack, but I can't remember what channel it was in, what DM it was in. Now you just open up that actual feature of that piece of value you're trying to make the decision on, and that conversation is there for you to review. You can see exactly what happened. Another way to help with this, and just a quick example, is if you do have online meetings, create a cadence for those online meetings, right? So try to reduce them with maybe just one daily stand-up, a good daily stand-up, which is a daily plan, not a status update meeting. Let's make that very clear. Can reduce so many other meetings throughout the day. Set that daily plan. Maybe that's the only other meeting you have to have that day. You can have the rest of your conversations in a tool like Favro. And then, of course, all of your other meetings. But make those meetings, and if they change, very visible to everyone through an organizational collection like this company calendar collection in a tool like Favro. Collaboration and innovation. So everybody's worried, are we still going to be able to collaborate if we're not face-to-face, if we're not co-located? Are we still going to be able? The answer is a resounding yes, right? So from a collaboration standpoint, even a cross-team collaboration standpoint, where maybe you have product development needs to work with the IT team from time to time, right? So they can't go and ask IT. They can't physically go to their part of the physical office and talk to them if they need something from them. This could also be true with other departments like marketing and finance, whatever the case may be. It's true business agility, right? It's not just these silos of teams, but it's the cross-team teams working together to deliver this overall organizational value. So for example, say this product development team in their product development collection was working on this enhanced performance card, this enhanced performance feature So maybe the person working on this, the developer working for this, becomes stuck. He moves it into blocked. He can say why he's blocked. He needs IT to upgrade Jenkins to do the continuous integration to the latest version, to properly test what it is, this particular feature, this performance enhancement that he's working on. So he can say directly to Jack on the card, for example, who is in IT, I need this done. Jack can say I'm on it, blah, blah, blah. They can have that conversation directly on the card itself. But above and beyond that, they can actually take this same card and pull in maybe the IT team's board to see what they're working on currently into their collection, because you can have multiple boards, backlogs, cards can live in multiple places in Favro, which is very unique, and just pull this blocked card down into the urgent lane of their board, immediately calling out to that team that, hey, product development has an urgent issue. We should swarm on this, have that conversation on the card and pull this through to the various stages, accelerate this all the way through to done. John up here is able to see, thanks to relations, that IT has finished what it is they needed to do. They've upgraded Jenkins, and then they can move this back to in progress and continue working on whatever it is that was previously blocked. So you can see how easy cross-team collaboration even can be with a tool like Favro. Some of the core solutions to these challenges. So remote culture, right? So first of all, you have to get away from command and control as much as entirely possible, right? And move to more of this agile, remote first company culture. You've got to establish trust and accountability with your teams, with your people. Leaders have to think less like managers and more like servant leaders, where their whole goal is just to provide that direction, focus on the strategy, focus on actual leadership, what it is that's going to drive the business forward, give that clear direction. And then the other part of being a servant leader is clearing the way. Let people do the work that they were hired to do and get out of the way. If they do have impediments that you can help with, then clear that way for them. For the actual individual contributors in your organization and your startup, since there's no, Daniel knew this for a long time, working remote and distributed, there's no place to show up to show that you're working, right? So it's all about adding value. You have to think much more, even as an employee, you have to think much more like an entrepreneur. How can I contribute? What value can I add? And that's how you show up. And that's the way it actually always should have been. And then as much as you can open things up, transparency and visibility through all levels of the organization. To achieve that overall true kind of business agility, you have to have that transparency. You have to be able to see what each individual teams are doing to remove those silos. You have to remove the organizational levels silos as well. Provide that visibility so people can always go and see, okay, what are the strategic goals? What's driving the business? How can I better contribute to what's driving the business? A good example of this here in Favro is this company dashboard. So this is maybe something that you could make available to the entire organization, depending on how transparent you want to be. You, of course, could make it private and limit it to just particular individuals and groups. But here you're driving your entire startup. You have new business opportunities, feeding a company roadmap maybe, feeding boards over here on the right. You can pull in not only what's driving the overall business, but you can see team level backlogs. You can see team level boards, all in real time, and all from a single screen collection. Again, the amount of data, the amount of information that you're able to have in a single screen collection all at the same time, and you can see how fast this is, it's just tremendous. Okay, so it really breaks down from a solution standpoint to remote culture, remote process, and remote tools. So from a remote process standpoint, you need to think about organizing and focusing around your value streams. So a lot of organizations don't even really know what their so-called value streams are. Value stream being from the time a need comes in or a request comes in from a customer through all the various different maybe teams, silos, departments, to the time you've actually delivered and been paid for whatever it is you do as a company. They've never even really truly visualized and identified those value streams. But now especially now that you're remote, you have to identify those value streams, organize around them, break down the silos that deliver that value, and focus solely on that flow of value from start to finish, not just at the team level, but throughout the entire organization. So it's not just about team level agility anymore, it's about true business agility for that entire organization. One of the first steps to achieving this is to build an overall corporate or company organizational cadence. So everybody has to be in sync. We have these weekly check-ins at the team level. We have these monthly syncs for the entire organization, or for this, depending on how large you are, for this entire value stream business unit, whatever the case may be. But the entire organization has to be working in a cadence, a repeatable cadence, an iterative and incremental cadence, to be able to quickly, first of all, understand what everybody else is doing, keep everybody in sync, but also to be able to inspect and adapt to change much more quickly on a weekly basis at the team level, on a monthly basis at the business level, so to say. Move to self-managed autonomous teams. Again, another very agile concept. Maybe give the team the direction. What is it you need to achieve in this 2 weeks? Go. Let them figure out how to best do the work and achieve what needs to be achieved. Company, and also we've already seen, instead of focusing on how many tasks is somebody getting done, how much time are people online, look at value-based metrics, flow-based metrics. How much value are we able to generate and deliver on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, so on and so forth. And you can do that all even without having to do anything. It's all built in behind the scenes in Favro. And finally, last but of course, obviously not least, remote tools. Remote tools, as Patrick said so eloquently, instead of having a huge campus or a fancy office with lots of amenities, now it's all about having the best tools, because that's where the work is happening, in these remote B2B tools. And you want to simplify that tool stack. It's going to be, even me running a startup myself, it's so easy to add another tool because you have another problem. The key is to minimize, simplify that tool stack. You're going to reduce the complexity. You're going to reduce those silos, different silos of information living in all these separate tools. You need to find the smallest tool stack possible to run your organization. And that, is another great reason to use Favro, because Favro can really handle everything that Zoom's great. We're using it right now for this webinar, for synchronous meetings, for those real-time meetings. Slack is great for the asynchronous, sometimes somewhat synchronous general discussions, but it's not good for decision-making, having the conversation where the work is actually happening. And a tool like Favro can literally handle everything else. It becomes your digital office. It's where you have that contextual communication, where you're actually creating the content on the cards, where you're doing your planning, you're doing your collaboration, and you're tracking that flow of value throughout your startup, throughout your organization. And I have another quick example of this here. So a marketing team may need to work, right? So you'll have an internal marketing team, and now you're working with externals, probably even more so than you were pre-pandemic. It's more important than ever to bring those outsourced agencies, those external developers, so to say, closer in to your now digital virtual organization. Favro facilitates that. You could have, for example, this external marketing agency's board in the same marketing team collection with the internal marketing team's boards. They've got a Scrum board here, a content creation board here, and maybe you have a backlog, this marketing asset list backlog, and some of these are being given to this external marketing agency, and some of them are feeding the internal marketing agency. But from the backlog, thanks to relations, as they're called, you're able to track everything because the cards can exist in multiple places, all from this single backlog. So I can say, okay, all these campaign assets that we're creating, where are they at? Number one, this is staged, being done by that external agency. This particular one is in mock-up, being done by our internal content creation team. So not only doing the cross-team internal collaboration, but also collaborating, again, in real time with external agencies and outsourcers. All right, I just want to call out, there are a number of success stories, Favro customer stories available here on favro.com. You can see some of our past conversations from webinars, as well as some interviews I conducted pre-pandemic with Favro customers, Favro clients from all different parts of the world, all different industries, and how they've used Favro to essentially run their entire business. Now I briefly want to talk about, as we're wrapping things up, to make it easy for people who are watching this either after the fact online, or people who thank you again for joining us here in real time, to make it easy to make the move to remote or improve your remote performance, your remote productivity. We put together this 5-day Favro Quick Start. And this page, which you'll get through the link on the card, breaks it all down for you. It's basically a managed end-to-end implementation of Favro, including training. We help migrate you from your existing tools into Favro, so you don't lose any of that data. We handle all the integrations for you, integrations to maybe the other tools that you need to keep, Slack, Jira if you want to keep Jira, GitHub, G Suite, etc. We manage all those integrations for you, set all of those up for you. Also provide the Favro Platform Master Training and Certification. If you're new to Agile, or if you have some experience with Agile, but you know you need to be more Agile in this new remote and distributed world, there's also some built-in Agile professional training specific to how to implement these Agile techniques, ways of working into the Favro platform itself. Okay, well, thank you, Patrick. He's rejoining us now. And thank you, our special guest, Daniel, for joining us today. Very educational and insightful.
Super. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.